IB Bio Diversity Evolution Classification Part 4 will focus on plant and animal diversity with an introductory section on the characteristics of prokaryotic cells and then the characteristics of protists and fungi kingdoms within the eukaryote domain. The essential idea is species are named and classified using an internationally agreed upon system. The outline of available movies for the Evolution Core SL and HL is provided here. Use this outline to find the movie you need. This movie is focused here. The Earth's diversity has generally increased over time, as can be seen in this graph displaying number of genera, plural for genus, over the last 600 million years. It's important to note the 5 mass extinction events. Meteor impacts often strike the Earth with enough force to cause dramatic extinction. Scientists have grouped all of the world's organisms into 3 domains: the archaeans, eubacteria, and eukarya. The archaeans and eubacteria are prokaryotic. Their cells lack compartmentalization and lack a nuclear envelope around the DNA. The eukarya domain includes all organisms whose cells have a nucleus, including Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. It's important to note that viruses are non-living biological particles. Here's a diagram displaying the 3 domains: archaeans, eubacteria, and eukarya. The common ancestor is here. Archaeans are prokaryotic cells that tend to live in extreme environments, hot environments or salty environments, etc. Archaeans have certain characteristics that suggest that they are more closely related to eukarya than eubacteria are to eukarya. Prokaryotic cells, archaeans and eubacteria, lack compartmentalization, as can be seen in this micrograph. There is little internal structure. Prokaryotic cells have various characteristics. They tend to be unicellular and small at 1 micrometer. There's no nuclear membrane, few internal organelles. The cell wall is composed of peptidoglycan. There is flagella, but it's a specific kind unique to the prokaryotic group. There's 1 loop of DNA, small ribosomes, 70 S ribosomes. These cells divide by binary fission, not mitosis, and there's varied nutrition. What do I mean by that? Well, photosynthesis, respiration, nitrogen fixation, etc. Work to be able to describe the characteristics of prokaryotic cells. Here are images of prokaryotic cells. It's important to remember how small these cells are. 1 micrometer, maybe smaller. Thus, without electron microscopes, we do not easily see any internal structure. In this micrograph, we can see a single bacterial cell with its single loop of DNA extruded from the cell. Prokaryotic DNA is not associated with histone protein, and in addition to the large circular loop, there are small rings of DNA called plasmids. Bacterial cells have varied metabolism. Some are photosynthetic, some fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, and some function without oxygen. They are anaerobic, living in anoxic environments. Here is another micrograph of a bacterium dividing into 2 by a process known as binary fission. This is how prokaryotic cells divide. Notice the lack of compartmentalization. There's a nucleoid region, there's no nuclear membrane, 1 large loop of DNA, and small rings of DNA known as plasmids. The DNA is not associated with histone protein. Bacterial cells often have a slime capsule around them. The cell wall is composed of a substance called peptidoglycan. Peptidoglycan is a protein-carbohydrate complex. Pili serve to adhere the cell to a surface. Now, eukaryotic cells are compartmentalized cells. By way of example, they have a nuclear membrane around the DNA. There are other characteristics of eukaryotic cells, such as they are larger than prokaryotic cells, ranging from 10 micrometers to 1,000, possibly larger. There is a nuclear membrane around the DNA. There are internal organelles, by way of example, the chloroplast or the mitochondria, Golgi, ER. There are numerous chromosomes. The DNA has non-coding sections. The DNA is wrapped around protein, histone protein, and the ribosomes are larger than prokaryotic ribosomes. The ribosomes are known as 80S ribosomes. The first kingdom of eukarya to look at would be the protists. The protists are a widely varying group, and with DNA analysis, our understanding of protist diversity indicates that the protists are an extremely diverse kingdom. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me that within my lifetime, the protist kingdom will be split into 2 or 3 kingdoms. Protists are unicellular, typically, but not always. There's definitely a nucleus. They are eukaryotic, and they have varied nutrition. This micrograph is of Giardia, a well-known intestinal parasite. Trypanosomes, seen here in blue amidst red blood cells, are also protists. Trypanosomes are single-celled organisms with a nucleus that cause disease, sleeping sickness. Trypanosomes are transmitted to people by biting insects. Like Giardia, trypanosomes are heterotrophs. They feed from the organic materials of other organisms. The next kingdom of the eukarya domain is the fungi kingdom. The characteristics of fungi are they're eukaryotic, they have a nuclear membrane, multicellular mostly, but yeasts are fungi and they are unicellular. They're heterotrophic. They feed on the organic molecules of other organisms. They have cell walls composed of chitin. Their body is composed of haploid cells, cells with half the number of chromosomes as diploid cells, and they have hyphae. Hyphae are filamentous extensions. All of the material that I've covered so far in this movie will appear again in various units of this course, for example, the cells unit. But here's the first of 3 significant IB syllabus statements that drive this movie forward. Distinguish between the following phyla of plants using simple external recognition features. The phyla that you need to know are the Bryophytes, the Philocenophytes, the Conifererophytes, and the Angiospermophytes. The plant kingdom would be best described as photosynthetic, autotrophs, multicellular, eukaryotic, cellulose walls, and non-motile, mostly. The Bryophytes are the first of the 4 plant phyla that you need to get to know by key recognition features. Bryophytes, the mosses, have spores, no seeds. There is no vascular tissue. Vascular tissue has vessels serving to bring water up to the leaves from the roots. Bryophytes have no vascular tissue. Bryophytes do not have true roots, leaves, or stems, and their sperm are mobile, an adaptation to wet environments. I'm sure if you took a walk in the woods, you would be able to identify bryophytes, but you need to be able to add that bryophytes have spores, no seeds, no vascular tissue, no true roots, leaves, or stems, and that bryophytes have mobile sperm, which is an adaptation to wet environments. The Philocenophytes, the ferns, the second plant phylum you need to get to know. Like bryophytes, Philocenophytes have no seeds, but they do have vascular tissue and they do have true roots, stems, and leaves. Like bryophytes, Philocenophytes also have swimming sperm, an adaptation to wet environments. But this is also a limitation, as Philocenophytes and bryophytes do not do well in dry environments. I'm sure if you walked in the woods, you would be able to identify Philocenophytes. Young fern fronds have a fiddlehead appearance. This is a characteristic of Philocenophytes. Spores are haploid structures that are released from the underside of a fern leaf. Spores then divide by mitosis to become multicellular structures on which the sperm or egg are formed. Don't worry too much about the detail of spores. Remember, Philocenophytes have vascular tissue, no seeds. The Coniferophytes are the third plant phylum you need to get to know. Coniferophyte characteristics include cones with seeds, woody stems, narrow, needle-like leaves, vascular tissue, and pollen derived from male cones. I'm sure if you took a walk in the woods, you would be able to identify Coniferophytes. These are trees with cones and needle-like leaves, They have vascular tissue and seeds. These trees are pines, spruces, and firs. The Angiospermophytes are the fourth and final plant phylum you need to get to know. Characteristics of the Angiospermophytes include flowers that produce protected seeds. This is unlike the Conifererophytes that produce a less well-protected seed. There's vascular tissue in the Angiospermophytes, true stems, roots, leaves, pollen from the male part of the flower. Among all the plant phyla, the Angiospermophyte phylum is the largest, and the flower is the defining characteristic. Animals are best defined as multicellular eukaryotic organisms, heterotrophic, no cell walls, motile, mostly. Animals are best distinguished from plants by the fact that animals are not autotrophs. Animals cannot manufacture organic molecules from inorganic molecules. Animals are heterotrophic in that animals consume the organic molecules of other organisms. Here is the second significant IB syllabus statement of this movie, the second of 3 statements. Distinguish between the following phyla of animals using simple external recognition features: Porifera, Cnidaria, Platyhelmintha, Annelida, Mollusca, Arthropoda, and Chordata. Before looking at the various animal phyla, an important bit of background information has to do with body plan. The poriferans and the cnidarians have a radial body plan. The radial body has numerous planes that would produce mirrored forms. The bilateral body plan found in Platyhelmintha, Annelida, Arthropoda, Mollusca, and Chordata has a single plane that would produce mirrored forms. Poriferans, the sponges, have a radial body plan. Characteristics of the poriferans include non-moving, pores through the body, cells are loosely specialized, there's no mouth or anus. Cnidarians include the jellyfishes, corals, and anemones, and cnidarians have a radial body plan like the poriferans. Characteristics of the Cnidaria phyla include the gastrovascular cavity. They have one opening, a mouth, no anus. Any undigested material exits the same opening as the food that entered. They have stinging cells, muscle tissue, and primitive nerve tissue. Cnidarians include the anemones, and cnidarians have stinging cells, a key characteristic. They also have the gastrovascular cavity. It's a mouth, no anus, a single opening for food to go in, and any undigested material to go out. The phylum Platyhelminthes, or Platyhelmintha, is the flatworm phylum. Characteristics of Platyhelmintha are bilateral symmetry, flat, gastrovascular cavity, one opening, a mouth, no anus, no segmentation. Bilateral symmetry is a more recent form in the evolution of animal groups. In this diagram, you can nicely see the bilateral symmetry. The mouth allows food in and undigested material out. One opening to the digestive tract. Food goes in, wastes come out. Many flatworms have eye spots, allowing the organism to orient toward or away from light. Here is a photograph of a flatworm in the ocean. It's beautiful, but it's important to note that tapeworms that infect the guts of mammals are also of the Platyhelmintha phylum. The Annelida phylum includes segmented worms. The annelids have a bilateral body plan, and they are segmented, and they have a complete gut with a mouth and an anus. Food runs in, and wastes go out the other end. Annelids include earthworms and leeches. If you took a walk in the woods, you would recognize the Annelida phylum, earthworms, and leeches. Their characteristics include bilateral symmetry, segmentation, a complete gut, mouth, and anus. Mollusks are an interesting phylum because, other than their bilateral symmetry, they appear like no other phylum. Characteristics of the mollusk phylum include soft bodies, we don't see segmentation, complete gut, mouth and anus. There is an external shell in most forms, and a muscular foot. Interestingly, larval forms of many mollusks display segmentation, evidence of their close relationship to the other phyla that display segmentation, like the annelids or the arthropods. If you took a walk in the woods, you would recognize the phylum Mollusca. Snails are mollusks. Their characteristics include soft bodies, they're not segmented, complete gut, mouth and anus, food goes in one end, wastes come out the other, with an external shell in most forms. The phylum Arthropoda displays classic bilateral symmetry and a highly segmented body plan. The phylum Arthropoda includes organisms familiar to you: insects, arachnids, the spiders, and crustaceans, crabs, lobsters. Characteristics of arthropods includes bilateral symmetry, a complete gut, mouth and anus, segmented, jointed legs, and an exoskeleton composed of chitin. If you took a walk in nature, you would recognize the arthropod phylum. Their characteristics include an exoskeleton composed of chitin, which is a carbohydrate, by the way, jointed legs, segmented, bilateral symmetry. The phylum Arthropoda is an easily recognizable group for their jointed legs and chitin exoskeleton. The phylum Chordata, a phylum that includes humans, is a familiar phylum to you. Chordata characteristics include bilateral symmetry, a structure called a notochord with a nerve cord that runs just above it, dorsal to the notochord, gill slits as a part of the developmental phase, and a post-anal tail. While it's fair to say that the Chordata phylum includes all organisms with a backbone, it's better to speak of the notochord. The notochord is a flexible, rod-like structure that is present in the embryos of all chordates and found in the adult forms of certain groups, such as lancelets and hagfishes. All of the groups seen here represent classes within the Chordata phylum. All of these classes have backbones. And that brings us to the last IB syllabus statement of the movie. Using simple external recognition features, distinguish between the following classes of the Chordata phylum: fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Characteristics of fishes include external fertilization, gills for breathing, scales along the skin, and fins used for motion. Characteristics of amphibians include lungs, external fertilization in water, larval stages that live in water, a soft, moist skin. Characteristics of reptiles include lungs, shelled eggs laid on land, internal fertilization, a dry, scaly skin. Characteristics of birds include lungs, shelled eggs laid on land, forelimbs as wings, and feathers. Characteristics of mammals include lungs, mammary glands that provide milk to young, birth to live young, hair, fur. And that brings us to the end of IB Bio, Diversity, Evolution, and Classification, Part 4. Part 5 will look at cladistics, a way of analyzing the evolutionary history of organisms.